Thank you. Again, welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is part of a series of webinars and podcasts that we will be publishing in the next few months. This is part of the Road to Safe and Healthy Food project, where we will be providing information to farmers about the food safety regulations and many interesting topics. Today, we're lucky to have Ram Krishna, Florida Organic Growers Executive Director with us. He is a lead trainer of the produce safety rule and also trained the trainer of several courses and trainings that are related to the food safety. Ram has a lot of experience and he is going to be talking today to us about the proposed changes to the Food Safety Modernization Act, agricultural water rules. So with that, I'm going to leave it to Ram. Please hold your questions till the end. And if you have any questions or if there's anything that you would like to point out, you can use your chat while the Ram is giving his presentation. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Juan Carlos, for this introduction, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. We are at the important time when it comes to the implementation of the FSMA regulation. Started in 2011. The first effective implementation started in 2018. So it was a long process, but together, what's more important about this proposals versus the other proposals or the rules that we had is the FDA has listened. The FDA has listened and made amendments and changes to the rule that for the longest time, several grassroots organizations such as FOG has been asking for. So it was really a good changes, proposed changes the FDA has made, but of course there is always caveats, which means that we need to do some work with the FDA to make sure this rule fits everybody and fair and also allows the producers to comply with this regulation. So having said that, after giving the intro today, we'll be talking about what is the ag water rule for everybody's sakes. And then we're going to talk about what's the current status of the ag water rules. What are the proposed changes? I will not be able to go through all the changes, but the key changes that I think our organic and sustainable ag farmers will be affected. And then we'll be talking about what are some of the comments FOG has collected so far. And then lastly, I do wanted to hear from you what would be the solutions, because it's easy to say this doesn't work. FDA, it doesn't work. But if you're also able to solve and treat them as our partners and be able to provide solutions, obviously we get better results, especially when FDA is listening like it has been now. So having said that, so a little bit about FOG. Most of you here knows about FOG. FOG has been founded in 1987. It's a not-for-profit. It's a grassroots organization. We have been here for more than 35 years now. And quality certification process is the certification program of FOG. FOG, so the QCS does both organic and food safety certification, including the FDA's third-party certification program outside the US, and also has several food safety certifications such as Global Gap, and SQF and other certification as well. So when we make the presentation, we are making the presentation not just because we are the lead trainers, but also have the experience in dealing with implementation of these rules, not here in Florida, but also the other parts of the world. So that's a brief description about FOG. And I want to have a special thanks to Dr. Danluck and the team, Dr. Snyder and Dr. Goodrich, who are good friends. The relationship with ever since the FDA funded the concept of Southern Center, especially these three folks, relationship with the university systems, land grant systems has been pretty good for not-for-profits. The Southern Center, which FOG is a part of, which UF is leading and it's stationed in UF, funded by the FDA, has been instrumental in achieving a lot of these common goals. We are easy to communicate with the FDA, so I want to take time to thank the UF Southern Center here. Now, before we start into it, I know there are producers who always ask the question, am I included in this rule or not? So I just want to quickly go over what is covered and what is not covered, who is exempt and who is excluded, just to give a frame of references. So there are few categories in the rule. They are excluded, exempt from the regulation. One, for people who are growing commodities that is rarely consumed raw. A good example would be uh, coffee bean, a green coffee bean. Um, sorry, coffee, roasted coffee bean. If it is that coffee bean is rarely consumed, this is one example I'm using it here. That is rarely consumed raw. And then if, say, for example, you are producing a crop that includes a kill step. I'll use an example. If you use mangoes, you're growing mangoes, and the mangoes is consumed as a juice, and there is a pasteurization process during the juice process, then they are exempt from the regulations. On the same hand, if the mango is consumed raw, then they will be subject to the rule. Then the next category is average annual produce sales. If your sales of produce is less than a certain amount, $25,000 or less, for the averaging 3 years, you are exempt from the regulation. There are also some certain exclusion if you're like the retailers, that is also can be excluded. But for today's purposes, if your annual production sale is less than a certain amount, that is exempt from the regulation. And then finally, your annual food sales. So if, for example, you're selling directly in a farmer's market type situation, then you may be exempt. But it's very important to understand, no matter whether, just because you're exempt does not mean that you don't have the obligation to follow the regulation. You still need to keep the records, because how do you make sure you're exempt? So you still need to keep the records. Records needs to be kept for 2 years. That's all in the regulation. And then regardless whether you're exempt or not, we as a producers, we as a organizations that helps to support the producers must understand and take actions to reduce risks in the farm. So just to recap, and maybe the next slide I have, the FSMA regulations. Um, one of the things I really like about the produce safety rule is FDA has already identified the major risks in the farm and has given these five: the humans, soil, animals, equipments, and water. As of those are five risks or potential that can introduce pathogenic organization that can cause harm to humans can enter into the produce. So because it is already identified, made our life easy. So why it matters, especially if you're people who have experience working in the processing plant, where you are familiar with HACCP and all those hazard analysis. Now you had to go beyond HACCP. Um, so people would appreciate that the produce safety rule in a way is simplified, because the FDA has already identified these five risks as a potential source of contamination of the produce where microbiological hazards can be introduced. Especially, so today's topic, we are not going to cover all those different topics. We're going to just focus on water. Water is very important part of water is a very important part in the risk for potentially introducing microbiological hazard. First, agriculture water. It's in the rule. If you see a dollar sign, and I'm using some of the slides from Produce Safety Alliance because I'm a lead trainer, I've been able to use it. The ag water, if it's used in production and processing and handling and holding, must be safe and of adequate sanitary quality for its intended use, which is actually be it used in the flumes or be used in irrigation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm trying to give us a good background for us to go and understand the regulation a little bit. So water must be safe and adequate sanitary quality for its intended use. There are two kinds of water when we talking about ag water. When we talk about ag water, we're talking about two types of water that's used in production during the growth. Water is called production water. Water, when it's used to produce, is used in contact with produce during the growth, is considered as a production water. Example would be for irrigation, fertigation, foliar sprays, frost protection, and other thing. If the water is used during harvest or after harvest, it becomes post-harvest water. Why it's important? The requirement of production water and post water are very different, and and maybe I'll explain later as we go through different slides, especially in terms of the detection of indicator organisms such as genetic E. coli. So there are mitigation measures, corrective measures you can take during production water if your threshold value of detected genetic E. coli is higher, but there is absolutely no such thing. You have to treat the water if you detect genetic E. coli in post-harvest. In other words, the big difference between production water and post-harvest is there should be zero detected genetic E. coli in post-harvest water. Uh, I am assuming that some of the materials that I'm presenting that you all have gone through some kind of grower training and understand why I'm using the word generic E. coli as an indicator organisms. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be able to explain later, or you can email us a question. I'll be able to explain why generic E. coli has been used as an indicator organization. The proposed rule allows other indicator organization as long as can be scientifically validated or substantiated or justified. So two waters, production water and post-harvest water. This proposed rule. So why is production water? We are going to focus mostly on production water here today. And there's a couple of reasons for it. One, the proposed changes almost affects the production water. For post-harvest, and if you're growing sprouts, there's no change from the rule that is already in place. This only applies to production water, except for sprouts as well as and no change in the post-harvest. What are some of the concerns with the production water concerns? Many factors impact the quality of the water, many sources and uses of the water on the farm. Human pathogens are typically introduced into the water through contaminated water during growing activities. There is a lot of science behind it that explains how, if you look back several outbreaks and if you do the analysis, the water was contaminated because of an activity to an adjacent land use, like the Yuma Valley cases where FDA was tracking it. There are several examples can be given that that water played a major role, contaminated water played a role in an outbreak. So production water at farm level is very important, and making sure those water comply with the regulations is also equally important. And there are ways we can mitigate those risks, but that is for a separate course. You should probably take the grower course offered by Food Safety Alliance to go a little bit more in depth, because the purpose of this webinar is just mostly focusing on what's in the rule, what has changed, and how does it impact us, or what is the concerns we have. These are some of the uses if you are using. So we'll be talking about we'll be using the term like covered produce, and what is a covered produce. We'll be using terminology like production water, ag water. So if any of them is not clear, please let me know and I'll be able to explain in the later. But it's also important. I'm assuming most of you at this point in time that have taken at least one person in your farm, if you are qualified, if you're not an exempt operation and you're qualified, have taken the Food Safety Alliance course, so that at least some basic terminology is communicated here. So these are some of the uses of production water: irrigation, fertigation, crop sprays, cooling, frost protection, dust abatement, and any other use. If any water that comes for a crop, what we call as covered crop. In other words, they're not ready, they're rarely consumed raw, and you're using water, and that water comes in contact with in your production process, and that water comes in contact with the crop, then it is subject to the rules. That's just making simple statement. Now, we talked about the importance of ag production water meeting the purpose of its intended use. But this slide, I just want to give a big picture overview of, in general, treated water, public supply water that you get from the municipality is supposed to be compliant, which has a lower risk. I take the word back, it's not compliant, is to have a lower risk, whereas surface water such as canals which is open to the environment, is subjected to more higher risks. So just keep that in mind as we go through the different slides. So what has happened so far? As I mentioned in the past, as I mentioned in the previous slides, FSMA rule is already in effect, except for the ag water part. What happened to the ag water rule? I'm going to click on this and see whether this opens. Most of you have seen some of the slides like this, different compliance date that has been published by FDA. The first, except for water, which is we call a subpart E, all other sections. If you remember the previous slides I made, I had the 5, the humans, the building and equipments, soil amendments, If you remember that slide, I made those other four elements have already have come into effect, except for water-related compliance, which was supposed to kickstart in January of this year. And then the FDA in December, sometimes in December, published this revised rule before it goes into effect, because FDA has listened and heard what the industry and several small scale organizations, several small not-for-profits such as have been saying for a long period of time, the problem with the existing rule. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. Hopefully it goes back. Let me see. How do I go back? Um, so all the parts of the FSMA rule is already in force, except for this ag water rule. Just before the ag water rule went into effect, FDA published these revisions to the ag water rule after hearing from us, and we really need to want to thank the FDA on that, because some of the things they have changed is what we have been asking for a long period of time. Sorry, why is it going backwards? Now, in the next couple of slides, what my intention is to go ahead and talk about areas where significant change has happened. First, the section 112.4 has a new table. The table basically talks about who is covered, what needs to be done, and et cetera, et cetera. So what I wanted to do is there are several changes in the rule. Some of them are minor, some of them are more clarity. I'm going to focus on only key things in the interest of the time, and open up the floor, because there's a lot of discussions we may need to have. So the first change is the important key change that affects every single producers is the requirement on 112.43. Again, I want to remind you all, these are proposed changes. This is not final yet. And we'll talk about towards the end what we have to do to make, when it will go into effect, after how it's the whole process, how it works. So the 112 basically requires ag water assessment. So this is a new requirement, and I'm not going to read this whole slide, because the intent here is there is a new requirement for every single producer who are covered under this rule, who must have an agricultural water assessment. So what are the concerns we have? We believe this will require a significant guidance from FDA and education outreach, because not many, based on we have been talking to several organic growers in our state, and we believe there is a big difference between large growers and small scale growers. Let me explain to you why it matters. Large growers in our state may have been already been certified to a GFSI scheme. GFSI stands for Global Food Safety Initiative, such as Global Gap, or your third-party supply, or where you are selling, your retailer may have demand either a harmonized gap or a global gap or a Primus GFS. So those standards, so those growers already have a system or tools, because those standards already have a risk assessment you need to do. Those tools are already available to them. So large growers or growers who have a GFSI certified scheme already have this risk assessment tools available. So they may be able to use a consultant who are able to help them. However, for a diversified farms, such as several organic farms that our FOG certifies, you're looking at 20, 30 crops, and you need to do a risk assessment based on that. So the ability of our growers to be able to do this kind of risk assessment, in our opinion, could be challenging. And we expecting there is a long learning curve for these growers. So to go back to this first proposed change, like you need to do, sorry, I went too much faster. For this first requirement, agricultural water assessment, we believe there is a significant growth curve expected, and also the concerns of the growers, it may be too much to expect from the growers to do the ag water assessment on their own. So that's the first thing. The second major change that I believe is what's going on in the adjoining land use. If you the area that I highlighted has highlighted in red is something new. The top portion, you're supposed to do either way under the current rule, be it's an open water source, with what type of water you're using. You're supposed to do those risk analysis. Depending on, if you remember one of the slides, if you're using water from treated water from municipality, you have a low risk. Whereas if you're using a surface water, you're using high risk. What's new in this proposed rule is you are expected, as a farmers, we're expected to do and what is going on in adjacent and nearby land uses related to animal activity, and also take into account application of biological soil amendment of animal origin. You all should be familiar with the word BSAOAO now, but I'm going to say the biological soil amendment of animal origin basically refers to anything that comes from that has been used as a manure or a compost, but has an animal. One of the ingredient in those is an animal product or animal byproduct, be it manure, be it anything else, including eggshells. If you're using kitchen table waste, etc., that will fall under that category. So, so now, as a part of this risk assessment, you need to be concerning the BSAOAO, biological soil amendment, untreated human waste, and what's going on in the adjacent land use. So our concerns on this is, how is this possible for the growers to make a risk assessment on a land they do not own or have no control over? To what degree we can expect the growers to mitigate this contamination to the waters that is outside of their control. So these are concerns that we have on this proposed rule change that they make. So that is, to us, is very important that in a diversified farming system such as the organic growers, we already have an animals interaction there, but also to know what's going on in somebody's land, it's too much of an ask. That's just how we feel at this point of the time. The next change is the time interval. Um, the If you look at the previous, not the previous, it's still the rule. It's because these are proposed rules. You have a time of when you say you test for a water. You test water, and your water comes up with a generic E. coli level. I'm not talking about the typical when you do a water test, you have presence and absence. And then when you do a testing, you also get total E. coli. This is the generic E. coli test that currently as is written in the rule. The concern there was a die-off rate. If say for example you're testing it and in the water testing results comes up with generic E. coli certain level, there is a threshold level of established before. If you exceed this threshold level, one ways you can mitigate your risk is having die-off rate. Now, FDA still allows the die-off rate here, except that threshold level is now gone. And our concern on this is this level of knowledge does not exist. Previously, there was a die-off rate. Die-off rate is the natural way of how a microbiological organism die over a period of time. The current regulations do allow a couple of logs, 2 logs actually for 4 days of interval, but now that is gone. And as a result of that, each producer, if they tested and the water comes up with certain generic E. coli, I'm using generic E. coli, there are other indicators that you can use as well. That's in the proposed rule. But we need to be careful that for each crop, how does it varies? That knowledge does not exist. Neither to my best of my knowledge, neither does it exist in academia. There may be few crops here and there, but risk is site specific. So linking the site-specific risk with the die-off rate does not, in my opinion and our opinion, does not exist. So that is a concern on this proposed change. The next one is crop characteristics. This is all part of the risk assessment you need to take into account. Depending on whether you're growing tomatoes or whether you're growing lettuce or you're growing a citrus plant, these characteristics, the susceptibility of the produce to surface education or internalization of hazards. In other words, if the water is contaminated and the water carries the microorganisms and it comes in contact with lettuce, a crinkle surface has a more higher risk, such as lettuce, than a smooth surface. So that knowledge is expected out of the producer. So to us, the concerns here is we will need a significant guidance from FDA. And especially several of the organic growers who are here, or at least some of the growers who are here, I know they have produced several crops, and some of these crops, so you have to do a risk analysis based on some, you have 20, 30 crops, and you have to do for each crops, you need to do this risk. So we believe that we will need quite a bit of guidance from FDA, and significant outreach needs to be done to these growers to explain, if this ends up in the final rule, how they can use a tool that will help. Now, good news. These, so why I said, why when we talk at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned we're going to talk mostly focused on product. When we talk about, we're going to talk about protection water, and in protection water, we're going to mostly talk about excluding sprouts and post harvest, because those requirements, nothing has changed. If you remember if you attended the famous microbiological water quality profile and the associated water testing frequency, those are gone. So what is a microbiological water quality profile? In the past, depending on your water source, FDA has prescribed a testing frequencies. You basically establish a threshold value, and that threshold value is used to determine whether you meet those threshold value or you exceed this threshold value, and that threshold value is then used to do what you need to do. You can use die-off rate that I mentioned, or you can treat with EPA approved, properly approved, EPA approved with the proper labeling, follow the label regulations, and follow the EPA approved water treatment. You must do the water treatment if it exceeds the threshold value. We were FOG and NSAC, which FOG and NSAC and National Sustainable Ag Coalition, which is the part of it. We have right from the get-go, we thought this is too much of cost barrier, as well as for significant disadvantages for small scale producers. And this one is now removed, and we are extremely grateful and thankful the FDA listened to us. So that's the biggest change, that this too is gone. So far we discussed what are the major changes and how it affects. Now I want to say what is right in this proposed rule. What is right? And first and foremost, we wanted to say FDA's removal of microbiological water quality standard and corresponding testing requirements for free horse is welcome, and FOG supports it. It's been a huge barrier for our growers and higher expenses. So it's a welcome. And we thank FDA for listening to us. And FDA is right in taking the correct approach by recognizing that the risk assessments are unique to each farm, and providing a tool online tool to support farmers in building their agriculture is again a welcome approach. We are thankful that FDA is taking this, and farmers also appreciate, for the longest time that FDA tried to work with us. FDA worked with us, organic growers, and they also recognize that, especially our organic and sustainable, where biodiversity is the key and the use of manure is the key. The FDA's recognition of the long-standing practice, and sometimes we have animal crop interactions. So the FDA recognized that, and that's something that's also reflected in this regulation, which is a good thing. So we want to thank FDA for that. Now, like I said, this presentation was supposed to be 45 minutes. I'm trying to condense everything in a more simpler way. It appears key issues you need to be thinking about. It appears if you have a surface water, I talked about the risk assessments. The risk assessment has to include the adjoining land use, BSAOAO treatment, biological soil amendment of animal origin, such as compost and manure, if it has an animal source in it, ingredient source in it, the human waste. If you have to take into all this account, if you have a surface water, it appears to us that you are subjected to more scrutiny, which is surface water. Is a lot of people use surface water as a means of irrigating their system, as a means of not irrigation, production water systems. I mentioned the good thing about the previous rule is the microbiological water profile, but this has also come to us an Achilles heel now, because that threshold level is gone. What do we needed to do if we detect generic E. coli, and as an indicator organization, when you do the water testing, and that clarity is now gone. When the corrective measures needed is now gone. So we are hoping when we make this public comments that we can say to the FDA, we need a lot more clarity on that area. And the biggest challenge I see personally is the ag water assessment. And I know the intention is already many farmers, large scale growers are doing it through their GFSI certification, third party certification. So in relatively it needs to be, can be translated, but small scale producers are not ready yet at this point of the time. It's too much of too much of the expectations. So the whole ag water assessments would have an impact and bearing on this proposed rule. So these are the 3 or 4 major, on top of other concerns I have mentioned on each specific. These are the other concerns that we have on this proposed regulations. Um, our asks, I also want to share what are the things we are planning to submit as a proposed to the FDA is we do need an extensive amount of FDA support or state agencies or Southern Center support, and more specifically such as cost share programs for our growers, for our organic growers, sustainable growers, or any growers, any state for growers, because we believe there needs to be a disconnect. There should not be a disconnect between risk assessment and what is the expectation, and when the farmer does it should be the same when your inspector in the state of Florida, the Department of Ag is enforcing these regulations. So when the inspector shows up in your farm, uh, how does it all going to match up? Should be the same. So achieving the consistency, to achieve that consistency, we will be needing an extensive amount of FDA support. We also hoping that there are many, our state has a lot of Spanish speakers as an example, and also we have several underserved and marginalized groups in our state. We also hope there's going to be an additional support for that people that who do not speak English as a first language and for individuals. The biggest thing is I mentioned in one of our previous slides, FDA is appreciating FDA for online thinking, online tools that may be available, but there is a huge digital divide in our country. And we need to make sure that the FDA's proposal in order to reach marginalized groups need also to be open with paper formats and bridge those digital divide. Um, I don't believe in just saying, hey, FDA, this doesn't work, it works or does not work. Um, we need to also provide some solution to them. And it's not just throwing the ball at the FDA and say, hey, it doesn't work. How we can solve the concern there is, if you look at the science, there has been outbreaks. And if you look at the outbreaks, a lot of them can be tied back to the farm. Some are processing plants, most of them are farms. So we also need to provide solution and be responsible in making sure the consumers who are consuming the food is eating a food that is safe. Um, just because organic does not mean the food doesn't have to be safe. So we need to take food safety serious into account, but also we need to provide solutions. And so my thinking here at this point on this is to stop and take any questions or answer questions. But I also want to hear from you is, have you ever tried as a small scale grower? I know some of the growers here are small scale producers. Have you tried any risk assessment tools before? What is that we can do, that we can make through our public comments to make sure that we can communicate to the FDA as a part of solution as well, not just saying this doesn't work, that doesn't work, but also provide some viable approach to move on, because the FSMA rule is here is to stay. And we have an opportunity to make it correct for small scale growers. So that's why I wanted to hear from you all who are participating. But let me make sure, how do you make public comments? Here is the screen where you can see on if you can Google it, say FDA proposed ag water rule, it'll take you to this page, and at the bottom you can see a green button that says submit your comments here. You can make your comments electronic. You can also submit these public comments um, through mail. This is the address that you need to send, or you can also send it to us. We plan to, some of these concerns that I have listed there is based on collecting feedback from organic growers that we certify and work with. So we will be submitting those comments and recommend to the FDA. But if you submit on your own, or you can also submit to us, we will be able to gladly include the information and submit it to the FDA. And before I take questions and discuss about some solutions or what do you think, What do you think, how it's going to impact, and have a discussion. I just want to know, we also have a Road to Safe and Healthy Food Safety project funded by USDA and NEFA. We are doing several podcasts on there. It's not just food safety, but there is also other podcasts. So we encourage you to listen uh, to this podcast. And as always, you can always reach out to us as in the email that I showed here at education@foginfo.org. We are here to help and assist you. So with that, I'm going to stop. JC, if you wanted to make sure any questions and comments, especially I also not only questions, but also like to hear, what do you think? Is there any solutions we can help, or like, especially in terms of risk assessment is something that I'm looking for as well. Your feedback as well.
Thank you, Ram. And with that, yeah, we are opening the floor now. There are, a few farmers on today's webinar, and once again, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. I did want to ask or point out, as Ram was saying, the opportunity to make public comments are open right now, but there is a deadline, if I'm not mistaken. And so please, visit our website for more information. And as Ram was saying, things that, perhaps we want to hear what your opinions are, what your questions are, so we can, relate those to, the powers that be. And with that, I'm wondering if there's anyone in the audience, and you can feel free to unmute yourself. Tell us who you are, and if there's any comment or any question that you might have that, perhaps we can address, and that Ram can, sort of discuss further. Please feel free to do that now. Anyone? Typically, when there's a little bit of silence, that means that everything was very clear and that Ram did an excellent job, as he usually does when it comes to these things. But once again, we do want to hear from you. We want to make sure that your comments and your voice is heard, and that we can sort of try to address those concerns.
The growers who are here, Margie and there's a few others, this change will affect your farm for compliance, and especially the risk assessment. So I'm more than happy to set up a time and talk about it later as well, if you're interested to know more how it does. So please pay attention. Here is your opportunity. As I said, it's up to until April. We have time to make public comments, so that and FDA listens, and that's an important thing. The fact that they changed the rule, they gutted down completely the microbiological water profile requirement, water quality profile requirement, and the testing requirement, is that the FDA is listening. So let's take an advantage. We're going to be partnering with them to make things right, at least in a way that works for everybody.
Anyone? If there are no questions, again, we do welcome you to visit our website for more information about the podcast episodes related to food safety. We are going to have more webinars. We're hoping that we can, have opportunities for you to, ask us questions, or, listen to some of the other topics related to food safety in the farm. And as Ram was indicating, feel also free to email us at any time, concerns, questions related to food safety. We are here for you, and we really do want to, as Ram has been saying, make sure that your voice is heard, and that we are listening to some of the things that you are concerned about, and do our best to try to, provide answers or solutions, or at least, provide this information to the people who can make those decisions.
This is Margie. Thank you, Ram and Juan Carlos. Yeah, I'm concerned about the risk assessment thing. If you do, is there already a proposed set of questions for the risk assessment that you could maybe send us a link that we could try
Sure.
out, look at, and see what's on there? Because I think that would help. I'm for myself, I don't really even know what to say because I have to look at this further. We are in South Florida and South Dade in particular, very flat. So things like runoff from neighboring farms is not going to be much of an issue at all because the water does not go sideways. And we don't have any uphill or downhill here. So
Yeah.
that's, I guess, something that will help us not have to deal with some of this. But still.
The proposed rule section 112.43A, and there are 4 or 5 criteria that's listed there. I'll send it to you, but that's very generic in nature. No online tool is readily available at this point of the time. That will be one of our asks to the FDA, both in the paper format as well as an online format, to help us to guide our growers who go diversified crops to do these kind of risk assessments. And the good thing is they recognize risk is particular to each farm. FDA recognize that. That's a great thing. The not so great thing is actual risk assessment, which is kind of a little bit hard for you to do. I haven't, how would I say that, as a former auditor and a current auditor for the TPP program, not all the times, when I say TPP program stands for FDA's third party certification program outside the US, there are conditions you qualify for. You're not, let me be very clear, FOG does not recommend anyone getting certified to the TPP program, period. So it's just not a good thing. If your retailer recommends you to go through GFSI schemes, then it's up to you. We are not recommending that. I mean, I'm not recommending the FD, but the risk assessment is a challenging thing, especially for small scale producers. Simply, farmers already don't have time and the lack of in-depth knowledge required. Even though it's a requirement now, this rule, which is already in effect, requires to have somebody in the farm. If you're qualified to be a covered produce, you need to have somebody who has been trained in the grower process, sorry, in the PSA training growers, at least one person in your farm. Margie, I'll send it to you. No problem.
Thank you.
Well, if there is no other questions, I appreciate your time today, and thank you all for participating. We can send you this recording to you, or it will be available on our website. And if you have any other questions, just let me know.
Thank you everyone for joining today. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and join us in this webinar. Please stay tuned for more webinars and more podcasts in future weeks. Thank you.